The matat gets wiped before the woman who used it stands up from her knees. Not after breakfast, not after the dishes, before she rises from the grinding position, while her hands are still dusty with massa and her knees are still on the potate mat, she reaches for the damp cloth that lives in the same spot every single morning, folded over the lip of the clay water basin to the left of the matate, always to the left, never moved, never misplaced, and she wipes the stone surface in 3 deliberate strokes, outward from center. Then she stands. Then breakfast happens. The metate is already clean before the family sits down to eat what it produced. That sequence, tool used, tool cleaned, and tool returned to ready state before the user moves to the next task, is the entire philosophy of the uncluttered Mexican kitchen, compressed into one gesture performed before sunrise by a woman who never once described what she was doing as a cleaning habit because it was not a cleaning habit. It was simply the correct order of things. And the correct order of things, maintained without exception from the first task of the morning to the last ember of the evening fire, is what separated a kitchen that worked from a kitchen that fought you every time you tried to use it. The first habit is the surface that has one job and guards that job with its life. The meteti grinds, the comal heats. The preparation stone cuts and assembles, the drying rack dries. In a traditional Mexican kitchen, iron surfaces were not interchangeable general platforms where anything that needed to be set down could land temporarily until someone moved it. Each surface had a function so specific and so defended by daily practice that using it for anything outside that function created an immediate visible wrongness that every member of the household could feel. When the comal has one job, the debris on it is predictable. Massa residue, chile skin, the occasional corn husk, and cleaning it is a known, brief, specific action performed with a known tool in a known sequence. When the comal becomes a general surface where tools, fruit, cloth, and half-finished tasks accumulate alongside its actual function, and it becomes impossible to clean correctly because you cannot clean a surface that contains 6 different categories of debris simultaneously without addressing each category separately. The single-purpose surface is not a luxury of a well-equipped kitchen. It is the foundation of a manageable one. But here is where the genius starts. The second habit is the hook, the nail, and the hanging cord. The vertical storage philosophy that kept the floor and the horizontal surfaces of the traditional Mexican kitchen from becoming the archaeological accumulation of objects that modern kitchens inevitably produce. Every tool that could hang, hung. The molcajete had its cord. The clay pots had their wall pegs. The drying herbs had their ceiling hooks. The comal, when not in use, actually leaned against the wall at a specific angle that allowed air circulation and prevented moisture accumulation on its lower surface. The metate sat in its permanent ground position because its weight and function required ground contact. Everything else went up. The reasoning was spatial and practical and immediate. A kitchen with clear horizontal surfaces and clear floor space is a kitchen where you can see everything, reach everything, and clean everything in the time it takes to do the task before the next task begins. Clutter happens on horizontal surfaces. Vertical storage removes the horizontal surface as a clutter destination. No destination, no accumulation. Listen to me, mijo. Like the third habit is the inventory limit. The discipline of not allowing the kitchen to contain more objects than the kitchen's storage capacity can hold in its designated spaces. In a traditional ranch household where space was genuinely limited and acquiring new objects required real effort and real expenditure, this limit was enforced by the physical reality of the space itself. There was room for exactly the tools needed to cook for this family in this kitchen on this fire. And when a new tool arrived, an old one that had been replaced was repaired and passed on, repurposed for a different function, or disassembled for its raw material. The kitchen did not accumulate, it maintained. The modern kitchen clutters because the modern kitchen has no enforced inventory limit. Objects arrive faster than they are removed. Horizontal surfaces absorb the overflow, and within 18 months, the kitchen contains 3 times the objects it was designed to hold, and none of them can be found quickly when needed. Your grandmother's kitchen contained exactly what was needed, not one clay pot more. The fourth habit is the immediate return. The practice of returning every object to its designated place the moment it is finished being used, not when it is convenient, not at the end of the task, not at the end of the day. The knife returns to its hook the moment the cutting is finished. The dried chile returns to its storage jar the moment the required quantity has been removed. The measuring gourd returns to its peg the moment the measurement is complete. This habit sounds trivial, and its cumulative effect is not. Every object left out of its place after use is a small decision deferred, a micro task added to an invisible list of things that must be resolved before the kitchen returns to order. 20 deferred micro tasks accumulate invisibly across a morning of cooking and become the disaster that greets you when you look at the kitchen after lunch. 20 immediate returns accumulate into a kitchen that looks, at every moment of the day, approximately as ordered as it looked before cooking began. The kitchen does not get worse as the day progresses. It simply changes and returns, meal by meal, task by task, without ever deteriorating into a state that requires a recovery effort. The fifth habit is the clay pot hierarchy, the organizational system that determined which vessels lived where based on frequency of use, weight, and relationship to the fire. The olla used every day for beans sat closest to the fire in the position requiring the least movement to place and retrieve. The seasonal vessels, the large tamale pot, the atole olla, the celebration-sized serving vessels, stored in the back, elevated on a shelf or hung from the ceiling beams, accessible but not the daily traffic path. The small individual vessels, the clay cups, the sauce bowls, the individual serving dishes, nested inside each other in size order in their wall niche. Nothing was stored by where it fit in the available space. Everything was stored by the logic of when and how often it was needed, which meant that the daily kitchen operation required the minimum possible reaching, lifting, searching, and rearranging to access the correct tool for the current task. A new kitchen organized by use frequency does not produce the frantic searching that clutters surfaces. You do not need to pull everything out to find what you need, because what you need is always in the first place you look. Forget the expensive organizers. The sixth habit is the morning reset, the brief systematic return of the kitchen to its baseline state, as the first act of the morning before any cooking begins. Your grandmother walked into the kitchen before dawn and spent 5 minutes, not an hour, not a project, 5 deliberate minutes, returning anything from the previous evening that had drifted from its place, wiping the surfaces that needed wiping, confirming the fire materials were ready, and confirming the water vessel was full. This 5 minute reset accomplished two things simultaneously, but it brought the kitchen to the state where cooking could begin immediately without first navigating the residue of the previous day's work. And it caught the small drifts, the single cup left on the wrong surface, the dried herb bundle that had fallen from its hook. Before those small drifts compounded through another day into a larger disorder that required significantly more than 5 minutes to address. Disorder in a kitchen compounds exactly the way debt compounds. Caught early and corrected immediately, it costs almost nothing. Left alone to accumulate interest, it becomes a crisis. The seventh habit is the dedicated washing moment. Not washing as a continuous background activity interrupting every other task, and not washing as a deferred pile that grows through the cooking session until it becomes its own obstacle. But washing as a specific scheduled moment within the cooking workflow where all used vessels to that point are cleaned before the next phase of cooking begins. In a traditional kitchen with one water source and one washing basin, this scheduling was practical necessity. The water was not always running, the basin was finite. You washed at the natural break points in the cooking sequence. After the prep work was done and before the cooking began, after the cooking was done and before serving, after serving was done and before the kitchen was closed for the night. 3 washing moments, 3 clear transitions between phases. The washing never accumulated into a pile because it was never allowed to wait longer than one phase of work. The modern kitchen habit of washing everything at the end of everything is why the end of everything feels like a second job. Listen to me. The eighth habit is the fire as a timer and organizer. The wood fire that demanded attention at specific intervals imposed a natural task rhythm on the kitchen that the modern stove, which burns indefinitely without intervention, eliminates entirely. Tending the fire meant returning to the kitchen center at regular intervals, and each return was an opportunity to observe the state of the kitchen, return an out-of-place object, wipe a surface accumulating debris, and confirm that the current cooking task was proceeding correctly. The fire enforced presence, and presence prevented drift. A cook who walks away from the kitchen for 45 minutes while an electric burner maintains a constant temperature without intervention returns to find 45 minutes of accumulated small disorder. A cook who returns to the fire every 10 minutes returns 10 times during that same period, catches the disorder at 10-minute intervals, and prevents the accumulation entirely. The fire was not just a heat source, it was a kitchen management system built into the cooking technology itself. The ninth habit is the herb and spice organization that made every ingredient visible and every quantity knowable at a glance without opening, moving, or searching through containers. Dried chilies hung on their braid in size order, ancho largest, chile de arbol smallest, so that the correct chile was selected by position and size recognition, without reaching into a container and pulling out the wrong variety. Dried herbs hung in bundles labeled by smell rather than written tag, which meant every person in the kitchen could identify every ingredient by sensory recognition rather than by reading. A practical consideration in households where literacy was not universal, but the kitchen still needed to function flawlessly. The spice jars, rough clay pots with tight-fitting cork lids, sat in a specific order on the wall shelf that the cook memorized as a spatial map rather than a list, so that her hand moved to the correct container by muscle memory before her eyes had consciously registered what she was reaching for. Knowing where everything is without looking is not a talent. It is the product of a storage system consistent enough and stable enough that the body learns it the way it learns the position of light switches in a familiar room. The 10th habit is the zero temporary surface rule, the absolute prohibition in a functional traditional kitchen of any surface designated as a temporary holding area for objects in transition between tasks. The temporary surface is where kitchen clutter is born. An object placed on a temporary surface while its permanent home is decided about becomes a permanent resident of the temporary surface within 48 hours. Because the decision about its permanent home is always slightly less urgent than the current task and therefore always deferred until the temporary surface is covered in permanent residence of temporary surfaces. In a small ranch kitchen where every surface had a specific function and the kitchen's operation depended on those surfaces being available for their function at all times, a temporary surface was a surface removed from production. It was not an option. The object went to its permanent place or it went outside. The permanent place was decided before the object entered the kitchen, not after it had been sitting on the preparation stone for a week accumulating company. The 11th habit is the end of cooking accounting. The brief visual scan of the kitchen at the completion of each meal's preparation that confirmed every object used in that meal's cooking had been returned to its place before the cook left the kitchen. While not the full evening reset, that was a separate habit, but the immediate post-cooking scan that caught the ladle still resting on the pot edge, the chili stems not yet added to the fuel basket, the masa cloth draped over the wrong surface, the grinding stone not yet wiped. This scan took 30 seconds. It prevented the accumulation of post-cooking residue that in a modern kitchen typically survives from one meal to the next, compounding through the day until the kitchen by evening contains the layered evidence of 3 meals simultaneously, and cleaning it requires the archaeological excavation of that evidence in reverse order. The traditional kitchen was reset after each meal, completely. 30 seconds before the cook sat down to eat what she had just prepared. Listen to me. The 12th habit is the seasonal equipment audit, the twice yearly examination of every object in the kitchen that determined what stayed, what was repaired, what was repurposed, and what was removed. This was not sentimental. A cracked clay pot that had been patched twice and was no longer reliable was removed from the kitchen rotation and repurposed as a planting vessel in the garden or as a water collection vessel for the animals. A worn-out grinding cloth was demoted to a cleaning rag. A dried gourd vessel that had cracked beyond use was returned to the compost. The kitchen's object population was actively managed downward by this audit, preventing the slow accumulation that turns a functional kitchen into a storage room that also contains a fire. Your grandmother was not a minimalist by philosophy. She was a minimalist by mathematics. She understood that a kitchen with 30 objects she could find in the dark was worth more than a kitchen with 100 objects she had to search through in full daylight. The 13th habit is the most invisible and therefore the most powerful. The habit of finishing. Not starting multiple tasks and managing them simultaneously, but starting one task, finishing it completely, including the cleanup it generates, and only then beginning the next. This sequentiality is the foundation on which every other kitchen management habit rests, because a kitchen in which tasks are finished before new ones begin can only accumulate the debris of one task at any moment. A kitchen in which 5 tasks are in simultaneous progress accumulates the debris of 5 tasks simultaneously and reaches a state of disorder that no amount of organizational habit can address without first stopping the simultaneous tasks and finishing them one by one. The traditional kitchen ran sequentially by necessity: one fire, one primary cooking vessel in use at a time, one cook managing the sequence. The sequentiality was not a choice. It was the operating constraint of the technology. But the operating constraint produced a byproduct of perpetual manageability that the modern kitchen, with its multiple burners and multiple cooks and multiple simultaneous dishes, has traded away for speed and lost the orderliness that was sequentiality's gift. Yet the 14th habit is the child as integral part of the kitchen system, not as a helper assigned tasks externally, but as a participant who understood the kitchen's logic well enough to maintain it without instruction. In a traditional household, children learned the kitchen system by immersion from early childhood, watching the immediate return, practicing the surface wipe, understanding why the chili varieties hung in a specific order, and what happened when they were put back in the wrong position. A child who grew up understanding that the kitchen's organization was not arbitrary decoration, but functional infrastructure, that the knife on the wrong hook was a genuine problem that slowed the next person who needed it, maintained that organization not from obedience but from comprehension. The kitchen's order was transmitted as knowledge, not as rules. Knowledge that makes sense is followed without supervision. Rules without explanation are followed only when someone is watching. The 15th habit, and this is the one that makes the other 14 possible, is the decision made before the object enters the kitchen rather than after. Before a new vessel, a new tool, a new ingredient in a new container crossed the threshold of the kitchen, the question was already answered. Where will this live? What will it replace or supplement? And does the kitchen have the designated space for it in its current configuration? If the answer was no designated space exists, the object waited outside the kitchen until a space was created by removing something else, repairing something broken, and returning it to functions, or reorganizing an existing area to accommodate the new arrival. The kitchen did not expand to absorb new objects. New objects were absorbed into the kitchen as it existed. This single discipline, the pre-entry decision, is the reason the traditional Mexican kitchen never became a storage problem despite containing everything required to produce an extraordinary cuisine from raw ingredients every day of the year. The metate is wiped. The cloth is folded back over the left lip of the water basin. The kitchen is exactly as ready for the next task as it was before the grinding began. The woman stands. Breakfast will be ready before the sun clears the hills. That is the whole system. Not complicated, not expensive, not requiring anything that is not already in the kitchen and already in the hands of whoever is willing to move through the space with intention. Finish what they start and return what they use to the place where it belongs before they move on to the next thing. The morning requires of them. The kitchen does not stay clean. The kitchen is kept clean. The difference between those two ideas is every habit in this list practiced every day without exception for as long as the fire burns.